Buongiorno, benvenuti, welcome to Italy, welcome to Imola, and welcome back to Formula One. The first round of the World Championship hosted in Europe this season, and it's the Autodromo Enzo Edino Ferrari. And what better thing to do than look at the heavy upgrade package fitted to the red cars this weekend. And it is a fundamentally different package, although the team are playing down quite how important this package truly is. And before we take a look at the detail, let's hear from Jock Clear down in the pit lane.
So Jock, a pretty big upgrade from Ferrari this weekend. I was going to ask you to show us around the car and the new parts, but can you talk us through it?
Yeah, I mean, you say a big upgrade. I think we're sort of organically developing the car. And honestly, what you see on the outside, aesthetically, obviously you can see the changes, but we know that aerodynamically those changes are happening in the key areas, and around about the floor, around about the rear tyres, underneath the rear wing, all of that sort of thing. Honestly, as I say, it's an organic upgrade. So we've not changed the direction of the car development. This upgrade is bringing a slight shift in what we call the weighting of the car. So there'll be some speeds where it's delivering more. At different speeds it's probably delivering less, so it's tilting the map a little bit, as we say. And to come back to what I've said in previous show and tells, with our aero development, we're still pursuing that smaller balance window, so we're getting less balance shift through the corner, entry, mid, exit. That generally makes a more consistent car, and that is a car that a driver has more confidence in and can carry speed with confidence. So again, it's making the car a bit more benign, and we've mentioned that a number of times, and it's just a little bit chunkier everywhere on the map.
It's funny, when somebody normally talks about an organic upgrade in a Formula One car, they're usually referring to a driver change, but they're not losing Carlos Sainz until next season when Lewis Hamilton joins the Ferrari team, and whether that turns out to be an upgrade or not, well, we'll just have to wait and see. But the non-organic upgrades made of carbon fibre and various other clever materials are well worth looking at, and they start right at the front of the car. A revised front wing layout, they've changed the shape of the elements. It's a little bit subtle, it's different shaping, all of that different sculpting you typically see F1 teams doing as the season develops. But really that's not the biggest change. It's the front wing has been changed because everything behind it, and when I say everything, pretty much everything behind it has also been changed. So I want to start off looking at the side pod ducts. Now these are the side pod ducts Ferrari started the season with, and it's a very distinctive design. You've got this lower slit type duct here, and then a much bigger, wider, with the very distinctive Red Bull style protruding lower lip. And that's a cooling duct that Ferrari used. Note that onboard camera, that thermal camera they've just fitted underneath the mirror housing there in testing. That wasn't used for most of the season. So that's the layout Ferrari have been using all season long to this point. But coming into this weekend, they've bolted on a drastically different package and a drastically different shaped side pod to the car. Now, during the show and tell session earlier on today, the team didn't really want anyone to have too close a look at the shape of the side pod, and they left in the cooling bung onto that ducting so we couldn't get too close a look at it. However, that doesn't always work in Formula One, and we always have another way to have a close look at things. But first, the thing I wanted to draw your attention to, and that the team couldn't really cover up, is look at the shape of the side pod. It's a completely different concept, and it's no longer that lower protruding lip. They've gone to what some people are calling an overbite layout. Now, if that looks a little bit familiar to you, have a look at that shape, and then have a look at this shape. Yep, this is the Red Bull, their upgraded side pod introduced in Japan, and what the Red Bull's slightly more sculpted on the underside, you can see that overbite shape very, very clearly. Two very different interpretations of the same concept. But the other thing to take in note is that Red Bull have also got this vertical duct and this horizontal duct. The horizontal duct is quite a bit smaller than the one on the Ferrari. The vertical one is slightly larger, so different solutions around the same theme. But when you take a look at the car driving down the pit lane, this is Carlos Sainz just before free practice 1, I just want to draw your attention to the shape of the side pod with the bungs removed from the car, and you can see a very distinctive shape. That vertical duct and that horizontal duct, they've been joined together in a much sort of an R-shaped duct if you look at it from this side, or an upside down L, or a strange foot-shaped duct if you like, with my drawing on the screen here. You can see that shape of duct. Now if that shape looks familiar, It is, but it's not come from Red Bull. Forget about that. It's actually come from a surprising quarter, Alpine, who have been using this style of design from the very start of the season. And I think this is one of those cases where one F1 team has taken a look at what another one is doing and introduced a pretty similar concept. Look, you can see it very clearly here. There is that lower section of the duct, and there is that, well, funny foot shape, that funny L shape, that R shape, call it what you want. That is what Alpine introduced. That's where Ferrari have taken inspiration from, though not a lot of the other parts of the Alpine have given Ferrari inspiration at all. So that's quite an interesting area of development. I wonder if other teams like Red Bull start looking at that. I particularly wonder if Hassel look in that direction because, well, they usually look in the direction of the red team for inspiration anyway. Now, the side pod itself has changed in its overall shape. It's a little bit subtle to see in this image, but the whole section, particularly around here at the leading edge, is completely reshaped, and that says to me there's probably been some changes underneath the bodywork as well. And something that really reinforces that are some of the other detail changes. Start with the rear view mirrors. Now you can see here, don't worry about those little bung, those little sort of attachment here, that's just holding the bung in the side pod. Wish they'd remove it, but they didn't because they don't have to. But Ferrari has relocated the rear view mirror support. Now that may seem like a little bit of a nothing change, but actually these supports form quite an important aerodynamic element. That's why teams are always playing around with them. And you can see it a little bit clearer from this angle here. This long vertical section that links to the underside of the mirror, well, it doesn't need to be that big, does it? The mirror stalk could just come down here and sit on the side pod, but that extra distance, that extra freedom in the regulation allows them to play around with a few other aerodynamic tweaks, and that's what that's all about. But this is where stuff starts getting really interesting because Ferrari clearly looking at the top surface of the car and how they're channeling airflow over the top surface of the car. You may remember the flying buttress style designs that Ferrari started the season with. Have a look here. This is pre-season testing. You can see that relocated mirror stalk there. But as we come through the corner, just take a look here at this section. As the car comes a little bit further forwards, you can see what I call the flying buttresses, where they link this section of the bodywork to the back of the halo. Now this section has been completely redesigned and removed. Now you can't really see it in this shot, but if I play it forwards, we should get a look at the rear face of that section of the car. And actually there's a really big cooling exit just behind this section. We'll run it forward a little bit more. It's a while since I looked at this footage, but you can see that cooling exit behind those flying buttress style links to the halo. Well, that's all been deleted, and they've introduced these new sections either side of the driver's head. And you can see it very clearly. It no longer links to the halo. It's a very large aerodynamic element. It's probably the largest sticky uppy bit we've seen since we started using that expression all the way back in 2020, I think it was. And as you can see, absolutely no cooling exit located underneath that sponsor's logo. As you look at that section in side view, you can actually see the upper piece of it has a wing section. So clearly quite an important aerodynamic part and quite a lot to do with what's going on downstream. And I am getting to that point. What is going on downstream from there? Well, if you take a look behind the rear wing, you can really see it. Ferrari has completely revised its cooling exit layout. As you can see, those cooling exits there have been completely removed and replaced with two small slit coolers either side. Whether they're giving cooling exits to the same thing, we're not sure. And then two very large exits either side of the bodywork. Now these cooling exits, I think, are absolutely a piece of sculpture on the car. When you start looking at some of the angles of these parts, just look at these curves here. Absolutely beautiful engineering, real sculpture, real precision made. And it just looks like something you might see in a modern art gallery rather than you see on a racing car doing 300 kph around Imola. And when you start to look at it downstream and look at these shapes, you can actually see what's going on. You can see there's cooling gases going to be coming out of this little slit and loads of it coming out through these sculpted sections from that side of the bodywork. Well, Ferrari actually showed us this just before the start of free practice 1, and you could see it's a pretty big change. Not enough change though for Ferrari, because if we go back to Carlos Sainz coming out of the pit lane at the start of the session, Ferrari had already modified the design by the time, this was in like a 15-minute period, Ferrari had already modified the design and added in a second cooling outlet just on the left-hand side of the car, whereas that section was blanked slightly differently and some slight different panelling around here on the other side of the car. So Ferrari's still playing around with how they use that cooling exit, how they use that cooling surface, and what they've done around the rest of the car. And of course, making a change like that to your engine cover means a lot of the stuff downstream will be affected by it. So they've modified the upper wishbones and the shrouds around them and how they operate in response to the rest of the change, to the floor, to the engine cover, and of course that has an impact on the rear wing. Here's the rear wing Ferrari were using earlier in the season. I think this is Miami, and you can see this distinctive shape that a lot of teams use, where you've no longer got the rolled tips linking the end of the end plate to the upper section of the wing, but you do have this slightly curvy section. Well, Ferrari have gone a completely different way with this new upgrade package, a much sharper edge to the edge of the wing. It actually flicks up slightly rather than flicking down at the end. Really different design. Wonder how that will look in Monaco when we go to a high downforce track. Rather here at Imola, which is a slightly different layout, different sort of track layout. So I wonder how that will evolve. But you can also see the shape of the wing, quite different. Ferrari trying a few interesting areas there, and I think that's going to be of interest to a few other teams up and down the pit lane. And then the other big change, and it's harder to see, is in the diffuser. This is a rear view low into the floor of the Ferrari. And in case you're wondering what these little numbers are and the little dots next to them, these are little pressure tappings, little sensors mounted in the floor of the car. So Ferrari can study what the airflow is doing as it passes under the car on these ground effect cars. And that's a really important little bit of understanding for the team of how that upgrade package works. And speaking of understanding of the upgrade package, well, Jock Clear has a few more words on exactly that subject.
You touched on it there, lots of visible change externally, the cooling setup, but what about under the covers? What's going on there?
Well, as I say, what's going on is air movement, basically. As I say, there's nothing specific I can identify, but it's just cleaning up the airflow around, as I say, around what's going on in the rear wheels and in the diffuser area, and then of course energising the rear wing. That's what everybody's trying to do. That brings you generic downforce. I think what you see aesthetically is probably just a clean up and a result of that. So a lot of what you see on the top of the car is what you end up having to do once you've focused on the key areas of development. So we deliver where the aerodynamic influence is, and then we look at what's going on elsewhere. Has that affected the cooling? Yeah, it's reduced the cooling. So then we have to reroute the upper ducts and that sort of thing. So that tends to be a knock on what you see on the more the top side of the car, so to speak. But the key development areas have been very much around those aerodynamically influential areas under the car.
Well, some wonderfully vague comments there from Jock, and talking about the changes to the cooling exits on the top side of the bodywork, I think it's pretty clear that Ferrari have made some pretty significant changes to their cooler layout underneath the bodywork. And let's not forget, you can rework your coolers and some of the ducting around the coolers under the bodywork without taking any time out of your wind tunnel allowance. And a few teams have started taking big advantage of that. Note Red Bull, they took big advantage of it last season. They're still working on that this season. But Ferrari too, now taking advantage of that little, it's not really a loophole in the rules, it's deliberately there, but that little opportunity in the regulations that lets you develop the coolers without taking away from your wind tunnel testing and your CFD testing allowances. All of the bodywork you can see, that all has to come out of those allowances, and an awful lot of that allowance has been used to develop this package. However, perhaps because of that limitation, or perhaps because the team just had the opportunity to, they had a little bit of a sneak preview of how this upgrade package would fare. Due to the regulations allowing filming days, Ferrari brought the upgraded package to their home circuit at Fiorano, literally at the Ferrari factory in Maranello, and they took the car out on track just to see how it would perform. Now, that's all coming out, and we've seen a few photos of that, but what we didn't expect to see at the same test was Ferrari running on an artificially wet track with two cars. And you may notice something different about the car in front. That's an old Ferrari F122, albeit with a 2024 livery applied to it with the HP sponsorship on it. And then you've got this year's car, just Ollie Bearman, just sticking out in the wet to see how it's performing. And what's changed here is the FIA have asked Ferrari to trial their new spray reducing wheel covers and a few versions of that. And you can see that slightly more clearly in this shot. At the rear of the car, you can see Arthur Leclerc at the wheel of the car, not Charles, Arthur, his brother, and he's trying this big, it is a fairly big section with a large carbon fibre cover over the wheel, and you can see some of the openings in the wheel. Now these are removable panels, up to 3 of these holes can be introduced, and that's all to let the water out and the rain go somewhere, but it also has an effect on the aerodynamics, make sure those covers don't blow off. But the team don't quite know which works the best way, and that's what they were trialling with the FIA. Here's a close-up look at that rear wheel cover, and you can see those holes very, very clearly, but you can also see openings in the side of the wheel, almost like spokes, where we almost get to see the wheel again. Of course we don't, because the standard wheel covers are located underneath that, and that's one of the options that the FIA have been looking at. However, it's not the only option that the team were looking at. As you look at this image, you can see a front cover used as well as a rear cover, and you can see those openings on the front cover and the triple hole layout, though the upper hole is blanked off on this run. But look at the back, that's a completely solid surface there. So still the team trying different layouts, the FIA trying different layouts, and it's really interesting to see if it really worked. The idea is to reduce the spray as the car goes around the track. Well, have a look, see if you think that's working. Well, one of the people who did know if it was working or not was this man just here. Well, trust me, he's there. That's Ollie Bearman, and he had a few thoughts that he downloaded to Jock Clear and others after this test run. Let's see what Jock reports about that.
I just obviously chatted to Ollie Bearman, who was in the trailing car, and he said, you know, there's definitely some improvement. You know, the wheels are always going to churn out a load of spray, but the centre of the car does as well because of the diffuser effect. So a lot of that is still coming out of the centre of the car, but certainly the wheel impact and the spray out of the wheels is definitely reduced.
So just as was the case with the FIA rain cover test, is the case with the new upgrades on the Ferrari. Will it all actually work when it goes out on track and is put into real competition? Well, to see early thoughts on that, just before free practice 1, Jock Clear had this to say.
It's good to bring the upgrade. I mean, you always want to bring your upgrades as early as possible, but from doing a solid job, and that's super important. You know, the upgrades these days are going to be small. You know, we're not looking at a car that's half a second quicker. If you look at the grid, you know, you go from P2 to P6, you're a tenth of a second, and it's that kind of magnitude that we're looking for at the moment, because that will bring 2-3 places. But because those upgrades are relatively small and quite subtle, you need to do it in a very, very solid way, and to do that in Miami, to do that in Japan is very difficult. Obviously we're an hour from the factory, we've got all that data available to us live, everybody's looking at what's going on. This is a really good opportunity for us to do a solid job here and to get this car dialed in and to find the bit of development and the bit of performance that car is going to bring as quickly as possible. FP1, it's good that it's a clean weekend. I say a clean weekend. It's good that it's a standard format weekend where we have FP1 and FP2. That gives us a lot more opportunity to look at what's going on and just make sure that it's doing on track what we want it to do. So yeah, this is the ideal place to bring it, and we're confident we can really get the best out of this new package, even though it's quite a big. You know, you see quite a lot of change in the car. These 2 FP sessions, I think, will be enough for us to dial this car in and get the most out of it.
Well, it's clear to me that once again Jock was being a little bit reluctant to say this is going to be a big upgrade, this is going to have a big result. In fact, he's probably saying pretty much the opposite. Fred Vasseur has said similar. He thinks it might gain a few tenths, but when the field is so close, a few tenths might be what makes all of the difference in races and in qualifying. And on the form of free practice 1, it does appear to be working, but there's a whole Grand Prix weekend to go and an awful lot more races this year, and it's going to be a big case of wait and see. And will this Ferrari upgrade make all of the difference? I can't wait to find out, and nor can the Tifosi at Rivazza.